Hi, my name is Yasmin Terehi, and this is Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, consciousness, and spirituality. On today's episode, I'll be speaking with Solveig Barrios, the co-founder of the Mayan Wisdom Project, a Guatemala-based Indigenous education platform and marketplace, bringing ancient Mayan teachings, culture, and wisdom to the modern world. And in addition to providing masterclasses on mental health, wellness, and transformative Mayan practices, Solveig leads community projects with leaders of the Quichua, I'm going to mispronounce that, Mayan nation in the town of Lanquin, Guatemala, in order to uplift and empower them. There's so much more to say about Solveig, but I am so excited to welcome her to the show to share all her knowledge about Mayan wisdom. So Solveig, what does that word Kichi mean? And I know I'm mispronouncing it.
Yeah, the correct way to pronounce it would actually be Kekchi.
And what does it mean, Solveig?
Yeah, so the Kekchi is one of the several nations of Maya people who reside in Mesoamerica. Mesoamerica is the region where the Mayans have always lived. Mesoamerica is the south of Mexico, all of Guatemala, all of Belize, and parts of El Salvador and parts of Honduras as well. And in Mesoamerica, there are several different Maya nations. In Guatemala alone, we have more than 20 recognized Maya nations. One of them is the Kekchi Nation. The Kekchi Nation are in the region of the Verapaces of Guatemala mainly. And the difference between all of the Maya nations in Guatemala, even though they share the same oral tradition, they share a lot of the same views on life, a lot of the same history, they're still different nations. They speak different languages and they have a few differences. And so the Kekchi is one of the many Maya nations in my country.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, I hadn't heard that word before. So super fascinating. So can you tell us a little bit about who the Mayans were, what they created and why there's so much wisdom that comes from their society?
Mm-hmm. Of course. So as I just mentioned, the Maya resided in the region of Mesoamerica, which is, Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Belize. So the Maya nations date back thousands of years. The Maya are the indigenous or the originary peoples of this region. As I said, they are split into several different nations and they spoke many different languages. Their societies were incredibly developed, not only in science and spirituality and art, but they were so incredible at mathematics, at astronomy. They were able to really decipher so many important things in life. They were one of the most advanced civilizations at the time. For example, the Mayans developed incredible architecture. Their architectural practices are responsible for some of the famous pyramids that you can find in the region. Not only that, they were able to develop incredible calendaric systems as well. As a matter of fact, the Mayan calendar is so developed. Even up to today, the Mayan calendar is considered the most mathematically accurate and developed calendar to have ever existed in the history of humanity. And this calendar is still used today. It's very complex to understand, but it's amazing. Additionally, they were able to develop themselves super highly in the area of medicine, of agricultural practices, of biodiversity. They were able to keep track of many different things in the solar system and in outer space. For instance, they had many calendars that kept track of the cycles of different planets, including Venus being one of the most important and significant ones. They developed a full and very profound system of writing. They developed incredible art. They developed so much. And so the Mayans were really one incredible set of super advanced nations that has been residing in Mesoamerica for thousands of years, and they still exist, by the way. A big misconception is that the Mayans do not exist. However, they still exist, and their tradition has been able to be passed on from generation to generation for thousands of years through the oral tradition. And although, of course, with the invasion and many unfortunate events that have happened in our regions, some things were lost. The majority of it still remains intact and is still lived and practiced, especially in Guatemala, but a lot of it is still alive in Mexico and Belize and Honduras as well. So it's a little introduction to a really big, big, big civilization.
Wow. So I want to double click on a couple things you said. I'm super curious when it comes to the Mayan calendar. You said that it's, one of the most mathematically kind of significant calendars that people still use today. What are some of the things that we or the audience should really know about the Mayan calendar, or even just the way the Mayans thought about astronomy and timekeeping?
Oh, that's a good question. And it has a good answer, I think, because the Mayan calendar is really relevant nowadays. Not only is it still being used, but I actually recommend for people to get into it and to start using it. Let me explain something first. Calendar would be the incorrect word to describe what the Mayan calendar is. I call it the Mayan calendar for the sake of you and for the listeners to be able to understand what I'm talking about. The Mayans did not call it calendar. They called it cyclical count of time. And this, I'll still continue to call it calendar just for the sake of everybody understanding me. This calendar is composed of a set of several mini calendars that all intertwine with each other. It's more than 26 counts of different cycles of different things that happen in the earth and in space. They all intertwine with each other, forming the Maya calendar. That's why this calendar is the most mathematically complex one in the history of humanity, because it's keeping track of thousands of different things that are happening. Some of the calendars that are contained within the big calendar keep track of microcycles. Others keep track of macrocycles. Some actually keep track of time, but others keep track of space. Some keep track of the cycles of certain things in nature, agricultural cycles, lunar cycles, solar cycles. There's even one calendar, perhaps the most famous one and the most loved one by people. It's called the Cholquij calendar. The reason why people love this one perhaps the most is because it's known as the human level calendar. It is the calendar that keeps track of the cycles of human beings, and human beings are supposed to follow the Cholquij calendar in our day-to-day life. The Cholquij calendar is composed of 260 days. There are 20 different days in the Cholquij calendar, and each one of those days has a meaning, and each day has 13 different manifestations. I know this is a little confusing and maybe hard to understand. But this calendar of 260 days basically includes everything that human beings have to do on their day-to-day life to be okay mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. So the Cholquij calendar is composed of cycles of 13 days and cycles of 20 days. The cycles of 13 and 20 days intertwine with each other and give us a guide on what we're supposed to be doing on every single day of the 260-day cycle. Some days, for instance, are days for productivity. Other days are days for resting. Some days are days for forgiveness, for practicing forgiveness. Other days are days for spending time with family, with people. Other days are days for spending time alone. The Cholquij includes so many things. It even teaches us on which days to do certain things that people need to do, from resting to agriculture to healing our relationships, to conscious spiritual practices, to more physical practices that will sustain us, like economically or financially, to taking care of our body. The Cholquij calendar is the perfect calendar for human beings, and it's supposed to be followed for us to be healthy. I read once from a Maya teacher who wrote some post on Facebook, actually, but it's a Maya teacher, and they were a set of Maya teachers, and they were saying the Gregorian calendar, for those of you who don't know, that's the calendar we all follow nowadays. It's called the Gregorian calendar, makes us sick because it doesn't take into account the needs of human beings. But the Cholquij calendar, on the other hand, is such a wise thing that the ancient Mayans developed because it takes into account what we need on our day-to-day life, and it takes into account our health, it takes into account our happiness, it takes into account being balanced. So every calendar is so profound. It measures different things. Unfortunately, this is so complex. We actually have lost count of some of the calendars. We can say for certain that we understand 3 of them really well. And the other 20 something, we're still trying to fully understand because of how complex they are and because some of the wisdom was unfortunately lost. But the Cholquij is the one where we can tell you 100% we have never lost count. So I recommend to work with the Cholquij. It's life-changing, but I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And where can people, first of all, how do you spell Cholquij in English, and where can we find it?
Yeah, so I'm going to be speaking a lot of difficult words because they're in Maya language. So it's CH''OLQIJ, Cholquij. So where can you find it? You can't, you can go to our website. We actually have a Cholquij calculator so that you can see every day what Mayan day it is. And we also have a very cheap little app that you can download so that it syncs with your Google Calendar or your Apple Calendar so that every day you can see what day it is in the Cholquij. And it also describes what this day is for and what practices you're supposed to do on this day. So we're trying to make it more available so that people who are interested can follow it. But in the traditional Mayan world, you don't need an app or something. You just, it's a calendar. You follow, you know it by memory, you know?
Right. Amazing. Wow. So I'm super curious. I mean, that's just like one little small piece of the Mayan wisdom that has kind of been implemented or still is relevant in today's world, very much relevant. I'm curious, are there any other Mayan wisdom traditions that we should be thinking about or implementing? Have we been implementing these wisdom traditions, or has it been mostly lost when it comes to at least Western or mainstream thinking?
Yes. Oh my God. I wish I could have 5 hours with you because I could tell you so many different things, but maybe I'll give you a big one. Yeah. So if it's okay, I'm going to tell you a short story, a short Mayan story to explain why this is important.
Okay.
So there's a concept in the Maya world that every human being is supposed to follow. And the concept is called, another difficult word, mehelem shukulem. I can spell that for you later if you want. So, but mehelem shukulem. Mehelem shukulem is a big basis of the Maya tradition. Even though the Maya tradition embarks on so many different areas and topics, as I discussed, science, art, spirituality, education, agriculture, so many different things, regardless of who you are, what you do, the Maya believe that everybody's supposed to have their practice of mehelem shukulem. Mehelem and shukulem is difficult to translate. Trying to translate it, we've come to that it has a few different meanings. Indigenous words are always impossible to translate, just for the record, because you can't. Their languages are too beautiful and too complex, and words don't compare to Spanish or English or any other language. But Mehelem Shukulem kind of refers to gratitude, reverence, and sacrifice, actually. The day we're recording this on is really relevant today. According to the Cholquij calendar, we're on the day that is called 13 Toch. Toch is a very deep concept that really intertwines with the concept of Mehelem Shukulem, because Toch is the one that teaches us about payment. And the Maya also believe we're all supposed to do payment. What do I mean by this? People listening to this might even think, oh, that sounds bad. Sacrifice, payment. It has almost like a negative connotation if you just listen to it quickly, like I just said it right now. But I want to explain to you what this actually means and why it's important for people to practice it. Yeah. So in the Maya tradition, there's a practice, again, another difficult word that people do on a constant basis, and the practice is called kotzich. Kotzich is what people would wrongfully call in the modern day times maybe a Mayan ceremony. For the Mayans, that word didn't exist, ceremony, but it's the only translation perhaps that we could find. But the original word is kotzich. Okay. What is a kotzich? I'm lucky because I grew up in kotzich. But it's a practice that the Maya do very often. Some people do it daily, like the Maya spiritual leaders do it daily. Some people do it weekly. At the latest, you have to do it every 20 days. Like that's the minimum that you should do, is do it every 20 days. You cannot let a 20-day cycle pass by without doing your kotzich. Kotzich is the most ancient practice of the Maya tradition. Kotzich is a Mayan fire ceremony, to make it simple. At first sight, you might be thinking, and why is that important? Like, I don't get it, right? Well, I'll explain it to you as briefly as I can, because this is all too complex to summarize, but I'll still try my best. When you want to do a kotzich, you have to travel to a specific place, wrongfully nowadays called a Mayan altar. The original word for it was tabaltzich. Tabaltzich would translate to table of dialogue. So you would travel to a tabaltzich with a Maya spiritual leader or a Maya spiritual guide, whatever you want to call them. Their real name is Aki. And the tabaltzich, or the Mayan altars, tend to be really, really far away. So you have to sometimes hike a volcano for it, or hike a mountain, or go into a deep cave. And just getting to that cave takes 5 hours, and you have to pack and you have to travel. The people who participate in this practice buy what we call offerings, right? So they'll bring cacao, they'll bring incense, they'll bring candles, they'll bring liquor, they'll bring so many things that are not supposed to be consumed, but that they're supposed to be burnt. Every single one of those things is really expensive, by the way, to do a kotzich, because there's so many things that you have to buy. People spend anywhere from $50 to $300, and I'm talking Guatemala, a place where people are so poor and people are still making the effort to spend money that they don't have on buying these things that for someone might look really shocking. To buy things that they're going to burn. What's the point, right? Of buying something, spending money on something that you're going to burn. But this act is very significant because you buy all of these things. You go on this long trip. You have to do something really difficult, like hike a mountain, for example, for 2 hours. And it's painful to hike a mountain for 2 hours sometimes, you know? Sometimes it's hot. Sometimes it's raining. Sometimes it's cold. The practice itself can last anytime between 1 hour to 20 hours. It depends on the type of kotzich you're doing. An average small kotzich will last 2 or 3 or 4 hours at the very least. There's kotzich that last the entire day. And the whole practice that you do is you come with a spiritual leader who guides you through a whole process of saying thank you for 4 hours straight. So the first thing you do is you kneel and you kiss the earth, and you take off your shoes, you kiss the earth. And then you start saying thank you to the 4 corners of the earth, which represent the 4 elements. So you spend a long time saying thank you to the water. Then you spend a long time saying thank you to the wind and to the air. Thank you to the fire and thank you to the earth. Then you go into thank you to outer space. Thank you to the actual planet. Thank you to the birds. Thank you to the bees. Thank you to the trees and the plants and every single part of existence. You say thank you to literally everything. That's why it takes so many hours, because you just say thank you for a long, long, long time. That's what Mehelem Shukulem means. And you might be thinking, well, why are you saying, Solveig, that this is so important? Okay, in speaking with a spiritual leader once, I was able to really understand why this is so important. And you could just sit here right now. You and I could do a little practice for 2 minutes, light a candle and say, okay, thank you, life. Thank you for everything. And that would be nice. We should probably do it. But it wouldn't be as impactful as if you did all of this sacrifice, spent all of this money, went on this big trip, hiked, and now, believe me, you're sitting there, you're in pain, it's not so much fun. Sometimes it's even just boring. You've just been sitting there for 4 hours and all you want to do is go home. Sometimes it's even hard, sometimes it's really emotional. But because you're going through all of this process of making the sacrifice just in order to say thank you, like you just took yourself on this crazy journey just to get somewhere to say thank you for several hours, eventually that thank you really, really hits you hard. Eventually you're like, oh my God, yes, actually, thank you. Wow, thank you to the water, really, because if you think about it, the Mayans, by the way, don't believe in gods. They also don't believe in God. They don't believe in God at all. They just believe that everything in existence is sacred. So what they call our creators are the things that enable our existence. The water, for example, is a creator in that it enables our existence. How come? We could not live without water. Nothing on this planet could exist without water. The water can live without you, but you cannot live without the water. We could not live without the air. If there was no air anymore right now, we would all die within a couple of minutes, I believe. We could not live without the sun. What happens if the sun disappears today? Chaos. And what happens if the moon would disappear today? What happens if the bees would disappear? Everybody knows the world would end if the bees would disappear.
Yeah.
So Mehelem Shukpulem is the practice of kneeling, of saying thank you, of having reverence, and if necessary, to make a sacrifice in order to say thank you. And a spiritual leader I was talking to once told me that's why we bring our kids to Kotzich and we tell them, kneel in front of the water, because you have to understand that without the water, you cannot exist. And that's why it's so important that you are grateful to the water. Kneel in front of the wind, kneel in front of the plants, kneel in front of the bees, because they are your creators. The Maya believe that if we don't do this, if we do this, we start seeing the water as deeper than just a resource. We start seeing the air as deeper than just like a thing that exists that we never think about. We start understanding, oh my God, the water is actually so essential. Oh, wow, the wind is so important. I was telling my husband in Guatemala, we have drought right now and it rained yesterday and I was almost crying of happiness. And I told him, I remember 10 years ago, I was never crying of happiness because of some clouds and some rain. But once it goes away, I realize, oof, what a big problem. And our life is in danger if there's no clouds, So I'm about to finish, I promise. I tell long stories.
No, this is
just
great.
So there's an ancient story in the Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Maya Quiche people, that tells us that there were a few humanities that came before ours. One of those humanities was known as the humanity of wood. The reason we call them the people of wood is because they were hard, just like wood. They were really smart. They had big brains, but they didn't have a heart. They didn't have an essence. They didn't have a spirit. So what happened with the people of wood is they were so intelligent, but they lacked heart. They lacked empathy. They lacked essence. So they were not able to see the water as something sacred. They were not able to see the plants as something sacred. And they thought they're better than everything else in existence. So what did they do? They started destroying the forest because they needed wood and started using it as a resource. They started polluting the water. They started polluting the wind. They started mistreating and abusing all of the animals. It got so bad that all of the creation got together and had a meeting to see what are we going to do about the people of wood. And they said, well, actually, we have to destroy the people of wood, said the earth and the creation, because they said, if we don't destroy them, they're going to destroy us and they're going to destroy themselves anyway, because they're not going to be able to survive without all of us. And it was a meeting between the animals. It was a meeting between the rocks and the stones and everything. And so it's a metaphor, this story, for what we don't want to do. It's a story that we tell children when they're kids and adults too, by the way. It's a very familiar story, I think, in the modern day world. because it seems like we're all behaving very similarly to the people of wood. So I think having the practice of mehelem shukulem in our life, and if you look at all ancient traditions have their own version of mehelem shukulem, is essential, because not only does it make us appreciate life in a much deeper way, so it's actually personally healing for us, but it also enables us to see why we should have respect for all of the beings around the earth, and that we are the youngest of children, according to the Maya. Is like we're all brothers in this big family of the earth, brothers and sisters, but we're the youngest ones. And so the older ones are the animals, the plants, the water, the fire, the wind, and they don't need us to survive, but we do need them to survive. And so it seems like we're self-destructive right now. What we call civilization and being civilized is actually going against the symbiotic processes of the earth. And that's not civilized, that's savage. So I guess Mehelem Shukulam would be the one practice I recommend that people do their own version of. You don't have to do it the Mayan way, but any way where you can practice that gratitude would be important. Okay, sorry for the long story.
No, now I know we need 5 hours for this podcast, but there's obviously so much rich context for all the practices that you have. And, even something where I think in the West, when we talk about gratitude and even just having like a 12-minute gratitude practice or a 3-minute meditation focus on gratitude. I mean, I think the sacrifice piece for me in this story, it really, I think, it does something to the human psyche when we have to go through a literal journey, to get to a place of reverence and sacredness and communion really with the cosmos and with the planet and with the world. So I want to talk a little bit about, how do you go about collecting and preserving Mayan wisdom? I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind the Mayan Wisdom Project and what really motivated you to embark on this journey.
Yes. Well, I have a pretty unique personal story in that I'm just really lucky about who my father was. My late father, his name was Carlos Barrios, and he was a really famous Maya spiritual leader. He was very famous in Guatemala, in the Maya communities, because of all of the fighting that he did during the genocide, the 30-year-long genocide of the Maya people during the Civil War of Guatemala, which was from the 60s to 1996, so very recently, actually. And at a time where it was prohibited, and you would literally get killed for practicing your own tradition as a Maya person, for continuing to wear your attire, sometimes for speaking your own like a Maya language. A lot of wisdom was lost because parents were really scared of teaching their children Maya wisdom, Mayan languages, even giving them Mayan names, because I have some teachers who I know who have very Western names because their parents were like, I'm not going to name you a Mayan name. They might kill you for that. And anyway, they're not going to allow you in school if you have a Mayan name. So it's a very dark piece of history of Guatemala. We have a lot of dark pieces of history here. And my dad was a student at the time. He was a Maya spiritual leader, and his teachers, and he just spent so much time in the Maya communities with his teachers. And he decided to write a book with everything he had learned from the oral tradition, a book with all of the basic concepts of the Maya geocosmovision. And then that book came in really handy for people who lost their own tradition and were trying to recover it. And I'm really, really proud of that, because wherever I go in Guatemala, to any Maya home, my dad's book's always there. So my dad was really well loved in the communities here. And also he just also traveled around the world talking about Mayan wisdom and stuff. So I started this project, the Mayan Wisdom Project, with him, actually, right before he passed away. He passed away during the pandemic. So this started in 2020. So the reason we were inspired is many different reasons, actually. One of them is that the Mayans... Oh, let me debunk something really quickly. The Mayans never said that 2012 was the end of the world. I'll leave it to that because it's a really long story, but it was some Americans. I don't know. It was a fake Mayan calendar. Long story, but the Mayans never said that, just to clarify. But something did happen in 2012. And it was that the Mayans were finally, it was a change of cycle in this very big, complex calendar that I just told you about. It was a new cycle beginning. And the Mayans understood that at this time, it was safe and okay for them to start sharing their wisdom a little bit more, even though they're very guarded. The Maya people are very guarded with their tradition and their wisdom. But because nobody authentic, nobody original was allowed to share the wisdom, a lot of people from many countries and places were sharing fake Mayan wisdom that is just not the reality of what Mayan wisdom is. For example, Jose Arguelles. I'm just gonna say a name to give an example. He became really huge and big, and he shared a calendar that's not at all the Mayan calendar. So there was so much misinformation out there. Then we started to see all of these people saying, I'm a Mayan teacher, I'm a Mayan leader, people from all around the world who obviously were not actually Mayan teachers, because the process in Guatemala for a Maya spiritual leader to become a Maya spiritual leader is anything from 8 to 20 years of study. You require permissions from many Maya teachers, and it's a whole process, you know what I mean? And people were selling this, become a Maya spiritual leader, 2-month course, you know? And I was like, what? This is so incorrect. This is wrong. You can't, that's not allowed, you know? There's the cacao ceremonies and all of, like, the Mayan cacao ceremonies, which never existed in the Maya tradition, for instance. And so I was like, Dad, this is not right. Like, people are sharing so much misinformation is not correct. And it's also really dangerous for all of those people who are following them, you know, to fall into practices that are maybe done irresponsibly and could even potentially be dangerous, right? From a lack of people having the permission or even the understanding on how to work with certain medicines or certain practices. So I told my dad, hey, we can kill 2 birds with 1 rock. Why? The real Maya people in Guatemala, who are the preservers and holders and keepers of this tradition, are so poor. Guatemala is such a poor country. 50% of the children here have chronic malnutrition. There's such a big lack of education. We're going right now into helping towns that don't have healthcare. There is not even one single doctor in the community, and people are dying of simple things. And I have spoken to so many midwives and healers and spiritual leaders and people who produce incredibly beautiful artisanal products, and they're struggling to find food to eat. And then you find a midwife who has to go work as a cleaning lady or as a waitress to make ends meet when she's a keeper and holder of such a profound tradition. So I was like, Dad, okay, people in the West, like in Europe and the States, whatever, are interested in this. So how about we provide it from real Maya teachers so that they can have the floor to be the ones to teach their own tradition? Because it's also ridiculous that the first time in history where they're not going to get killed ish, because they still sometimes get killed, but where they're not going to get killed for sharing their tradition is going to be Europeans and Americans who benefit financially from their wisdom, you know, just because it's becoming trendy. It should be them who should be the teachers and financially benefit from it too. But we also create a safe space then for all of those people in the Western world who actually want to come close to this wisdom, to have a safe, responsible space where they can learn from real, actual teachers who are not going to put them in a situation where they're going to be doing something that might be unsafe for them physically or for their mental health. So we started like that. Eventually, we also started a shop where everything comes from Maya family-owned businesses that produce different things such as cacao or such as different traditional Maya items, so that people who are interested can also help sustain some of this artisans, some of these producers, and it's going really well. And I'm really happy and proud of this. And right now, we're also embarking on an even bigger journey. We're also going to start a nonprofit that's going to be widely Maya-led in the Kikchi Nation, which is the nation we were talking about at the beginning, hard to pronounce, where we're going to bring aid to the Maya communities, like education, healthcare, access to clean water, like the basic rights, but everything is going to be imprinted with their own tradition, so to also make it a reclaiming of their own roots, like their own agriculture, their own systems for cleaning the water, their own medicine as well as Western medicine, like the best of both worlds, and so that's kind of the inspiration of why we started to do things right, but also to really benefit the people who are the ones who actually deserve the most to benefit from it.
Right. And I'm curious, how's it going? How are people interacting with some of the teachings? Like, how is it sort of shifting or changing people's lives? And what have you seen? Like, it'd be really great to get like a case study or an example of how you've seen people shift with this knowledge.
It's great. It's going really, really great. I never imagined how big it would become because we started, me, my dad, and my husband, and it was so small, and we could have never imagined how big it was going to get. And I'm really so grateful for that. But well, in addition to, I want to share more about this soon on our social media and everywhere, because I just want people to see what a huge impact it has had on some of the producers of like different products that we sell on our shop. Like, it has actually legitimately changed their life, but also it has really changed the life of our clients. And I'm so proud about that, because many of the people who come into our community, and of course we offered a lot of paid resources because that's the way in which we can help sustain the Maya communities, the whole commerce that we do in the Maya nations. We also try to offer as much free stuff as possible so that it's accessible as well. And we have really, really, really high customer satisfaction rate. It's really nice to hear stories from many people in the Western world who come to me and tell me, "Thank you so much. This changed my life." Of course, that's always so emotional and positive to hear. But what we've noticed is that there's a few different types of clients that we have. One of our groups of clients are people who are from these regions, like Mexico, Guatemala, or sometimes it's just Latin America in general, who were taken away when they were very young, or who were already born in a different country, the States, for example, and they're trying to reconnect with the roots. And because this wisdom is not so available, that has been something that has been a surprise and something really beautiful and positive, that we have actually helped a lot of people reconnect with the roots and understand where they come from. So that's been very nice. We've received a lot of comments of like, "Thank you guys so much. Now I can teach my children about where they come from." And that's, yeah, I mean, it makes me so proud. But interestingly enough, the other group of people who come to us, I've noticed, is people who are highly intelligent, very academics. People, is interesting. I never expected this, but like, we have in our groups like people who are successful business people, scientists. It's so interesting, like big lawyers, psychologists, like all kinds of like people in the Western world. And when I've sat down and had conversations with some of them about like, how did you find us? Why are you here? Or when they write me to tell me their story and everything, is because they all tell us like, I kind of have made it in a sense of like the Western sense, success. Like, I have the house, I have the car, I have the job, I have everything. And I'm still so depressed, or I still struggle so much with anxiety. I still struggle so much with so many difficult problems. And I've tried many different approaches from the Western world that just have not worked for me. And so a lot of them were on a journey of trying to find an alternative way, because they were like, yeah, desperation. I don't know what to do. I don't even believe in this, but I just want to try something. And because they were on the search for something authentic, they had to go through a pile of a lot of that stuff that I was mentioning to you that is like not appropriate or not responsible and everything. And then they found us, and they've taken some of the programs taught by the spiritual leaders, by the healers, by the teachers, and it has changed their lives. I've heard crazy stories from some of our clients about a improvement of their health, like physical problems going away, their mental health improving, their emotional health improving, their general quality of life getting better because they're just going through life more consciously and happy. I love hearing stories like of people healing their relationships with family members that they were having issues with, all kinds of things, because Mayan wisdom really is about two things. Like, it's understanding. Well, a Maya teacher once said, this is a quote I recently read my one. Well, it's a quote from a Maya spiritual leader. Um, a Maya spiritual leader once said, there's two things that you have to understand in this life: the universe and yourself. And that's what Mayan wisdom is all about, is our connection to the symbiosis of all of existence and the respect and the relationship we have to have with the earth, with the world around us, with the community around us. But it's also the relationship we have to have with ourselves. And I think that those two parts intertwined with each other have been a game changer for me so much, but for so many people who have learned this. So I'm really proud of what we've achieved. And it's not me or us, like we all play a role in it, but really ultimately is the Maya teachers and their wisdom. So yeah.
Beautiful. Wow. I feel like there's so many more questions I want to dig into, but we are unfortunately coming to time. So Solveig, just wanted to connect and maybe we can, maybe can synthesize this because it's such a big topic, but I'm really curious about, the Mayan perspective or your perspective really on Mayan spirituality, like how were the Mayans able to connect such advanced knowledge? Was it through plant medicine? Were they just more conscious or connected to perhaps, the universe? Like, what are your hypotheses on this?
Well, I think if you ask that question I've asked this question many times actually to Maya teachers, and I've received the same response every single time. The answer is always observation. Well, look, firstly, the Mayans had, it's two things, right? I'm going to try to keep it short because I know we don't have a lot of time, but it's two things. Firstly, the Mayans had quite a lot of time to do their research and to be able to organize themselves as a society, as nations. They, as I said, their tradition, their nations, their communities date back thousands of years, and so they have thousands of years of teachers, of scientists, of healers, of midwives, of people who kept on studying the tradition. And one big benefit they had was the oral tradition and how good they were at recording and passing on this information. Like, we still have practices and information that were discovered 1,000-2,000 years ago, even more sometimes, that we still practice today thanks to the ability to record and keep track of that information. So it was not developed by one person, one generation. It was developed by generation after generation who took the research that was left and kept on going with it. So that's really helpful. But how do you achieve this? Organization. The Mayans have something that's called the pyramid of community development. And the pyramid talks about how a society has to build itself in order to become really advanced. The first step in the pyramid, and I'm going to summarize them because really there's each step, we could go into each step of the pyramid for 1 hour each just to summarize them each. But the first step is food security. The Mayans said that they were able to build the pyramids thanks to corn. What do I mean by this? Their agricultural systems were super advanced. They made sure that everybody in the community has access to food, not only to food, to superfood, to incredibly healthy food. Their economic system was very different than the modern day system. So agriculture was the basis of everything. And every person in the Maya society only had to work hard for 4 months per year. Like, you just worked for 4 months a year and you were covered. All of your basic needs were already covered. Food was covered. Everybody had their adobe house, which is another big topic, architecture. Everything was covered with only 4 months of work per year. The Mayans made sure that there were not so many distractions. And what did they do with the rest of the year? Develop their science, develop their architecture, develop their spirituality, develop their art. So they had a lot of time by covering the basic needs of all of society. The second step of the pyramid is health, right? And so everybody had the right to very holistic, profound, incredible health practices that I would love to get into, but I will not. But wow, you don't understand. You really don't understand what I mean when I say health. Their views on what health is and how to heal is wow. Then they got into education. Only then they got into organization and organizing their societies. Once everybody in society is healthy, all of their human rights, their basic needs are covered. And they built their entire society up on something that's called the world system. The world system means that whatever it is you do, and it was so strict, this was the biggest law of all, you would literally get kicked out of the community if you didn't follow it. And not only you, but your children, your grandchildren, and all of the future generations in your family would be kicked out of the community if you didn't follow it. Is that whatever it is that you're going to be doing, whether you're a leader in the political system, whether you're a creator of a project, whether you have a collective that devotes themselves to anything, or whether you're an individual, whatever you do has to follow three main rules. Number one, is whatever you're doing going to have any negative effect on any community, not only yours, but any community anywhere in the world? If it is, you're not allowed to do it. So either cancel the project or figure out how to not affect any community, because there will be a consequence if you try to. The second rule is anything that you're going to do have a negative impact on the planet, on the earth, on the plants, on the animals. If it is, you're not allowed to do it. Third question you have to answer: is anything that you're going to do going to have any negative impact or effect in the next 400 to 500 years of generations of people yet to come? If the answer is yes, then you cannot do it. So their society was so developed because they were not self-destructive like we are. Not only did they have time, they understood that the basis of everything is that every individual in a community is okay, that everybody has their needs covered, that we're protecting future generations, that we're protecting the communities, that we're protecting the earth. This being the basis of all of their societies and communities is how I believe they were able to be so advanced. They took care of themselves. They made sure they had time to be scientists, to research, to discover, to observe, but they made sure that everything was going to be have a positive impact on everybody, and that everything's going to be okay. And I think if maybe we copied the world system in the modern day world, we could maybe hopefully start changing how badly things are going right now.
Wow. That's really powerful, the way that the Mayans were thinking about project-based work and creativity and building things, because it was coming from such a cosmic-centric perspective and consciousness. So I feel like we just started to scratch the surface, Solveig. I mean, there's so much to say, but really, yeah. And, I'm curious, what, looking back, has surprised you the most on your journey?
In my general journey?
Yeah. I'm just curious, like distributing this information, working with Mayan Wisdom, connecting with people. What has surprised you the most?
How bad the modern world is. I've always understood it, Everybody probably does. You and everybody listening to this right now probably understands that, the modern world is not so sustainable, etc. But for me, seeing the contrast between what I just told you, how the Mayans live, how they used to live in ancient times before this amazing community they were building was interrupted by invasion, but and the modern day Western way of thinking and so much. But the contrast is shocking for me, because I come from going to the jungle, talking to the teachers, listening to stuff like this. And then I go into the Western world and I'm like, oh no, this is not right. The way we're living, the way we're doing things. But also, I was not a business person or something. Like when I started this project, I had no idea what I was doing in that aspect. My dad, I just grew up in the Mayan world. And so little by little, I've discovered things that have been really negative. For example, we sell cacao, right? produced by 100% by hand by a collective of women in the Kikchi Nation in the beautiful Guatemalan jungle. It's amazing. Okay, so one of the things you have to do when you want to sell cacao internationally is do some lab tests to make sure it's safe for consumption, right? And there's some laws about heavy metals on cacao. For instance, there's a limit to how much cadmium or cadmium, I'm sorry, I can never pronounce that word, can be in your cacao. Okay. But when I did my tests, they asked me, do you want to test it for all heavy metals? And I said, yes, please, let's test it for all heavy metals. And they tested for a bunch of stuff. And then it came back and they gave us the results for lead. And our cacao is, of course, 100% safe. We're happy to always share the lab results with anybody who asks us so that they know what they're consuming. But the lab told me, you don't really need to test for lead. And I was like, well, I want to test for lead. And they were like, okay, well, just so you know, even if it comes back super, super, super high on lead, even above the safe daily intake limit, you don't have to inform your customers about this. It's not illegal to sell cacao that's super, super high on lead. And I was like, what? So I went into a rabbit hole, of course. And I saw that there was a scandal not so long ago where they tested some of the most famous chocolate brands in the world, not even ceremonial cacao, chocolate. And like 70-80% of them came super, super high on lead. I went into so many rabbit holes, like getting into this other world that I never knew, which is like exporting things from Guatemala, which was really hard to figure out and everything. Just to seeing how the modern day world actually works, where so much of what we're consuming is really bad for us. So many of the marketing strategies that people are using to sell us things are so terrible. Like I met a guy once who told me, I also sell cacao. And I was like, oh, great. And he told me like, yeah, tell me about your project. And I told him, and he said, oh my God, you're paying way too much for your cacao. And I was like, no, this is on purpose. You know what I mean? Like we're trying to support the communities. He's like, no, I have a farm. He was like, if what you need is photos of indigenous people, you can just come to my farm and we can pretend they're the ones who own the business. And I was like, what? Like, what's wrong with you? And he was like, that's the way I do it. That's the way many people do it. That's going to be cheaper. And I was like, what is wrong with you? Like, how can you go to sleep at night saying stuff like that? So it's not a positive surprise, but it has really inspired us to try to be good people, and do things right and support people in a way that is actually positive and ethical, and to also make sure that people who consume whatever comes from us are safe. It's such a nightmare to think that so much of what we consume is secretly bad and we don't even know. And I think that has been something that has inspired me even more to do what we do and to try to do even more in the near future. But yeah, that's a bad surprise probably.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, Solveig. This was so illuminating. And where can people find you? Where can they learn more about your products and anything else that you're offering?
Yes. So our website is mayanwisdomproject.com. We're also on Instagram as the Mayan Wisdom Project. We're also on Facebook as the Mayan Wisdom Project. We're also on YouTube as the Mayan Wisdom Project, although we probably should work on our YouTube channel because we have very few videos. But you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or our website. And if anybody has any questions, of course, you can feel free to shoot us an email or a message on one of our social media platforms because we make sure to respond to everything. Yeah, that's it.
Amazing. Amazing. For our audience, thanks for joining and for listening. In this episode, we learned about the Mayan wisdom traditions with Solveig Barrios. And you could tune into Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, consciousness, and spirituality. Thanks again. What would you like to see change in your life? And what is the biggest obstacle that you're facing now? I run a 5-week program at the Inner Knowing School for serious individuals who are ready to take the next step in their personal and professional lives. I will personally be coaching a small group of individuals, a number of practical tools and frameworks for creating an intuition practice and for self-mastery. You can find more at theinnerknowingschool.com. I have a master's certification in intuition medicine, and I've condensed 10 plus years of experience and research navigating how to harness your energy and intuition in an easy to access live curated course. Now, as someone who's helped countless creatives, entrepreneurs, and many who are just plain stuck, open doors of possibility they never thought existed, I've seen this strategy transform people's inner states and external reality. And the best part is that you'll skyrocket your output and unlock your creative genius. I'll work with you weekly live to overcome your limiting beliefs and show you how to manage your energy instead of your time. I'll teach you how to create clarity, processes, develop your intuition based on some of the top tools and frameworks that I've developed, and you'll get access to guided meditations and visualizations not available anywhere else. This method is so effective that even if you don't have that much time, or if you think that you might not be ready, this will work for you. You can check out the link in the show notes to join the waiting list, and you can check out what past clients had to say about the program. Wishing you all many blessings ahead.